People suck, people suck, people suck. I don't like y'all. People suck, people suck, people suck.
Hello, everyone. This is Jason Rowe. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Republican Party, and this is the inaugural episode of our new state Republican Party podcast, Grand Old Podcast. With me coming to you from the Michigan Republican headquarters, our Communications Director, Ted Goodman.
Hello.
That's all you got to say, Ted? You're just going to say hello? You got nothing to add?
Oh, we have a lot to talk about today, Jason, so I'm ready. I'm fired up. I'm ready to get right into it.
All right. Our co-chair, Meshawn, Maddock.
Hey, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut.
Our Chief of Staff, Paul Cordes.
Hi there. I have a lot of opinions. I'm looking forward to sharing them with you.
And our Director of External Relations, Sarah Anderson.
Hello. Happy to be here.
So, we're talking this week about the coffee table talk that we have here in the office about what's going on politically. And so we thought it might be fun to pull together a podcast weekly to talk about what's going on in Republican politics and politics in Michigan and from time to time nationally. I would like to say the inspiration of this is the MERS podcast for a couple of reasons. I've only been here in this position for maybe 3 months, but it seems to me that MERS seems to be a bit of an extension of the governor's communications operation. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. The first was, I know reporters were calling the governor's office looking for information about the governor's COO, Trish Foster, who was in charge of vaccine distribution. These reporters couldn't get a call back from the governor's office, and then magically MERS gets the story. I know reporters were calling the governor's office looking for comment about the director of public health, Elizabeth Hertel's spring break in Gulf Shores, Alabama. They couldn't get a call back, and then magically MERS had the story. And then a couple of weeks ago, the governor appeared on the MERS podcast and blatantly lied to Kyle Malin on 3 occasions. And I want to specify the lies. When he asked her about any trips that she had taken, she said, quote, "My last trip was to Israel." That was in 2019. She said that there have never been any travel restrictions in Michigan, which is a demonstrable lie. And talking further about spring break, she says that she was, quote, "I was here in town the whole time. You saw me." Yes, we did see her, but we didn't see her for a few days when she appears to have gone down to Florida. She has provided no details to the media, to the public, while she has admonished everyone else in the state to stay home, to not go to Florida, to not go on spring break, to not visit their ailing loved ones. Clearly, there is a pattern of rules for thee, but not me. And I guess the inspiration for this podcast was listening to the 4 journalists on the roundtable last week tripping over themselves to justify the governor's lies and to unanimously decide that either 1, they weren't lies, or 2, they were okay lies because they were to justify her visiting an ailing parent. What do you guys think?
Jason, the issue is not that the governor wanted to visit her family. It's that Michiganders were denied that same opportunity when they were locked out of nursing homes and hospitals over the past 14 months.
I think even beyond locked out of nursing homes and hospitals, we were told, my in-laws live in Cadillac. I was told explicitly not to go visit them. They're in their 70s. They're in great health. But a year of missing time with my in-laws at the age that my children are, it's a year we'll never get back. But we did it because that was what was best for our Michigan family, the millions of people that live in this state. So I don't begrudge her at all for going to see her ailing father. What I do begrudge is the hypocrisy behind it when she told me not to go, when she told countless people to cancel their weddings and funerals and visits to nursing homes and kids' graduations because it's not the right thing to do, but then she can go. And more than that, I think the Michigan press, many of whom are fantastic people, I've worked with a lot of them over the past, 10 years, but they're abdicating their responsibility here. There are so many questions that haven't been answered. Whose plane was this? Who was on the plane with her? If a donor paid for it, was that donor on the plane? Was that donor vaccinated? What were they offered in return for transporting the governor to Florida? Did her kids go with her? Because as we know, kids, according to the governor, are the super spreaders, these young adults. My 14-year-old daughter is mandatory COVID tested every week to play outdoor soccer in a mask. Did her kids go with her? Were they vaccinated before they went? There are so many questions left unanswered. So not only are we sweeping it under the rug, we're pretending like everything is okay. It's infuriating.
And that's what Governor Whitmer's press office is banking on, that this story will go away because there's a press corps here that won't demand answers. And frankly, we're not going to let them get away with it. And we're going to find out what happened with this trip to Florida.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm struck if a Republican governor did what Governor Whitmer did, the press would lead every story with this. And I'm reminded of the press conference she did a couple weeks ago, in which I was watching the Twitter feed of the Michigan Press Corps, blatantly calling her out for saying things that aren't true. I believe it was Craig Mauger who literally put a comment that she put and then something else that she had said that directly contradicted. And he said, this statement is not true. I did not see one article covering that press conference the next day that mentioned any of the mistruths. And I promise you, if a Republican governor did that, the lead headlines would have implied
That was actually
dishonesty.
shocking that day. That was probably one of the first times in a really long time where I've seen the press even look into her at all. And you know what? When I was struck when I heard about this in a little bit of a different way, because I have been rebelling. I haven't been staying home. And what I loved about it was that it exposes her hypocrisy. For me, it shows that the governor is behaving way more like a lot of rebellious Republicans that I know than all of the good order takers and people who are listening. And you know, part of the reason that you're staying home and you're behaving is you have kids. My kids, thank the Lord, are grown and gone, because all of these parents and all of these mothers who want their kids to play sports and they want their kids to be able to get back to school, they're terrified to not be following her edicts because they're going to get narked out by another kid on the soccer team.
And I think she referred to the whole thing as maddening that people were looking into it, and how many lives and livelihoods have been destroyed truly over the last year. I mean, how many lives and livelihoods? The kids in mass, restaurant closures, proms, weddings. As somebody who literally had to cancel huge parts of their weddings. Oh, I had a December wedding, and we had to cancel a ton of stuff and make changes weeks, prior to the wedding. I felt firsthand, the things that she's done, the sacrifice.
You've made sacrifices.
And what she decides is truly maddening is not that she has ruined the lives and livelihoods and given us zero information as to the science that she's following and answered zero questions about what her rationale is for this, her decision making. But then she gets upset when we ask a simple question of how could you possibly, go to Florida? Like, how disconnected is she really from the people of Michigan?
Right. Maddening is the perfect word, because y'all can't see my face on this podcast, how red it's getting and the intensity I feel behind this as a parent of, a preteen and a teen who have watched their lives be completely disrupted. And that takes it, my kids are fortunate. I have the means and ability to make sure that they are going to be okay in their sports, in their schools, in their lives. What about all of the children who don't have parents who have that ability? The single moms who are working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. They don't have the time to homeschool their kindergartner. There are all of these facets. We all did exactly what she asked us to do. Mm-hmm. Some of us more than others, right?
Exactly. But you're right. What does that show those kids? The kids see the hypocrisy too. Yeah. What, our governor? I mean, it's horrible that our governor's father is sick. Guess what? My dad's a cancer patient in Florida too. You know what? I mean, first of all, I wouldn't not go see him because my governor told me, but it is no excuse. How many people have been away from their loved ones? How many people can't go see their loved ones in nursing homes right now and are terrified because their loved ones are locked up in nursing home with COVID positive patients?
Well, and I was struck by the governor's podcast interview, the softballs that were thrown her way. Governor, it seems like you've worked so hard the last year. There's a lot of people that are working hard. As I'm listening to mothers here at this table talking about what they've seen, what they've had to deal with. I'm thinking of one of my close friends who has 5 children, ages 13 to 17, and she manages a law firm. And she has all 5 of those children in her house while she manages the dozen or so lawyers. Can you imagine the bandwidth that you need in her house to do this? Because she's got 5 kids on Zooms, plus her on Zooms, throughout the entire day. They have them spread throughout the entire house. So it's a struggle for everyone, but I think to the point of the hypocrisy, rules for thee, but not for me. This governor is the one that issued these shutdowns, that told us not to do these things. And it appears that she and those close to her, including her husband, are able to do whatever they want. And it's maddening
And
that
back
we
to your
would question
original
them.
point, the media is complicit in this maddening behavior because nobody is holding her accountable.
Well, we could talk about COVID and the governor's hypocrisy all day.
Mhm.
I don't want to leave the topic of the media bias quite yet either. Meshawn, you were fortunate enough to be featured in the Detroit Free Press this week. Somehow the Free Press thought that you retweeting something on Twitter was deserving of prominent space on their pages, pushing off actual
so
news.
Goofy.
I was struck at their email that went out. Your retweet was the lead story in their newsletter on Thursday.
Yeah, I was glad it was Tom Leonard who reminded me yesterday that President Trump once said, "It's not the tweets that get you in trouble, it's the retweets."
True.
True.
That is
Because
true.
I had to straight up admit, okay, full disclosure, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I loved the video that I retweeted. It was a celebration in Florida of a lot of wonderful GOP people getting together at a Republican meeting, and they're all hanging out. And it was a celebration about, look at Florida, we're wide open, our numbers are low, and look at all these, great Republicans together. I did not read the comment below 3 other comments that said something about, people should start suing their employers if they're wearing masks. Didn't even read it. I just retweeted this.
So it wasn't even in the actual tweet. It was in the comments.
It was in a comment. And so, honestly, talk about a lack of journalism. I keep saying it to these people. I don't know how they look themselves in the mirror. The truth is they really just want to keep putting Trump in a skirt in the news. And that's me right now. And it's a total lack of integrity in their business. And I think it's embarrassing.
I have a close friend who had risen, a journalist, who had risen to be the White House correspondent for one of the major networks. And, so he was on the evening news on that network. He was on the morning show on that network. So you would think in the world of journalism, that's, kind of the goal, short of being in the anchor's chair. And he texted me one day to let me know that he was leaving to go to a print publication. And I said, why on earth would you leave a network White House correspondent position to go work at a print publication? And he said, because I'm not doing journalism anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm standing at the White House, responding to tweets and running to the camera to read other people's tweets. That's not what I went to journalism school for. That's not what I'm here for. And that's unfortunately what I think journalism is degraded to, is chasing around tweets and finding gotcha moments in something as simple as a retweet.
It's almost
in
like
the
they have a
comments.
bulletin board where they're like, how can we talk about the insurrection of the Capitol one more time? You know what I mean? Anything.
What's fascinating too is that I think all of us here, we're on Twitter. We pay attention to what's going on Twitter because we're politically involved. There's a very small percentage
Bingo.
of the world population
Yes.
that
Bingo.
actually is on Twitter. So the idea that this should be, number one, a news story,
Bingo.
but number two, a leading news story in email. Like, there is so much going on in the world, and particularly in this state right now.
And they took up space
Yeah,
in the Detroit Free Press,
and
one
I
of
know
the
this is
major
off
metropolitan dailies in the
topic,
state.
but the
The
same
flagship.
day, the exact same day that story ran, was there one story in the Free Press asking why a young state representative found with his pants down, with his passenger's pants down, she was vomiting. He had a gun in the cup holder, twice over the legal limit, rolling into a ditch. Not a single story on looking into that. I would like to know, and I want to know what journalists out there would like to know, who is that girl and is she okay? We
So-
still don't even know.
So, of course, Meshawn is referring to the recent arrest of Democrat State Representative Jewel Jones of Detroit, and kind of comparing how that arrest and the news coverage that got compared to something like this, a retweet of a tweet and a comment under the tweet.
Well, and it wasn't for me. Obviously, I mean, it was a non-story, but even the headline and the content of the story, right? Which is, and there's been this trend amongst journalism too, where they called what you were spreading misinformation, right? Like the whole COVID conversation amongst journalists, I think it was addressing the masks, right?
Yep.
There's become no room for debate amongst,
Exactly.
in terms of what's working, what's not working. I mean, it is clear that shutdown. How long have we been in masks in Michigan? More than a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that masks work or don't work. All I'm saying is it is clear that we can have some additional discussions on exactly what's working, what's not. Because in Michigan, we have been locked down. We've been in masks for over a year, and we have the highest COVID rates in the nation, right? Like, and for journalists just to say, oh well, Meshawn spreading misinformation.
Right.
When did we lose the ability to have adult discussions about science and what's going on,
an
rather
opinion.
than just labeling? Yeah,
That's
labeling
today's
her
Democrat
as-
Party.
Well, that's it. An opinion is right because you know what? The governor has governed by opinion, her opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to this day, we have never seen any of the data that she has used to justify shutdowns. And I don't say this to be partisan. It is a statement of fact. If you look at the states in the country that have had the worst situation over the last 13, 14 months when it relates to COVID, they are Democrat-governed states. California, the state that I fled to move home to Michigan, Illinois, New York, Washington, D.C. And think back to the criticism of Arizona, Texas, and Florida, the recklessness of these Republican governors not following the science, that none of us have seen the science yet. These are the states that are flourishing. These are the states with the economic growth where people are living their lives.
Realizing that this might get us off track for a moment, but you bring up New York. It's fascinating what's happening with Governor Cuomo in New York right now as reporters are doing their job and investigating his policies. And all of these things are being brought to light where people were celebrating what a genius he was. Forget that he was doing the same rules for thee, but not for me, allowing his brother, who was COVID positive, to be traveling around the state. The nursing home deaths that they have now covered up. Imagine if we turned the light on the Whitmer administration in the same way that people are doing right now in New York.
Great point. Why, I was watching it this morning too. Why is the media in New York paying attention and digging deep? The only media
Well, they were forced to because someone on his press team had made a mistake, and so they were forced to cover it a little bit. But let's also be frank about what's going on in New York. Cuomo's also getting some cover, right? If this was a Republican, this person would no longer be serving as governor. And so they've gone further in New York than we've been able to get our press corps here to go. But he's still getting cover as well.
I'm going to take us even further off topic.
Excellent.
The other thing I find, Governor Whitmer has had plenty to say about Republicans that she disagrees with, but it is pretty breathtaking to me that her friend Governor Cuomo, who his exploits and grab ass have been pretty extraordinary, and she's had nothing to say about this. She has had plenty to say about things that don't ever even injure people, words that may offend her. But here is a man who basically is a serial harasser with multiple women. And these are not Republican women. These are Democratic women, some that worked in his administration. And yet Governor Whitmer has yet to say one single word about him. I don't know if he's the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association or the National Governors Association.
One of them, yeah.
Why hasn't she called for his resignation from that?
Because they
Why
don't.
isn't the media holding it accountable? If this was Rick Snyder, for instance, and a Republican governor somewhere was head of the RGA, you don't think the media, every time there was a press conference, say, why don't you denounce this governor? Why don't you ask him to step down from your Governors Association?
We say it. You've noticed that we have a common theme. We each all keep saying, if this were a Republican.
Yep.
And it's all we can do is shake our fist at the moon because, look at it during the re-election campaign. Look at the difference between Don Jr. and Hunter Biden. I mean, it's the same thing.
Hunter Biden now has a teaching position at Tulane,
Yeah.
given all that he's done.
They're celebrated. They're celebrated.
And
for
why aren't Michigan reporters fired up that she will spend 20 minutes a weekend on Meet the Press or doing a softball interview with the Washington Post,
a conversation,
but will not answer their basic questions?
They even defend her.
Not only are you covering her, fellow Michiganders,
Yep.
you are her constituents.
And let's be fair, there are some, and Sarah's mentioned this, there are some really strong reporters here in Lansing.
Absolutely.
So as we talk about this, we're not even referring
Let's bring them
to
in.
everyone. There's some really good ones. And I honestly think, I'm telling you what you think, we are starting to see a little bit of movement from some reporters who are starting to push back a little, and they're seeing how disrespectful and the lack of transparency from Whitmer's comm staff, who they think these reporters are just going to lay over.
They think that because they have been.
Well, I think it's worth if I'm not mistaken, she's not actually held a press conference, an actual in-person press conference since last summer.
Since last summer, yes.
Since last summer, she has not actually held again, going back to, if this were a Republican, what Republican would get away with not answering questions from the press for almost
That's
a
all
year?
they would talk about till they got the answer.
Yeah, there'd be a daily count.
That's right.
Another big development this week, not anything that was surprising, but I guess confirms what we have to navigate, and that is the U.S. Census releasing the reapportionment numbers based on how many seats will be in the House of Representatives. As expected, Michigan has lost 1 seat. I did, looking at the map, find it interesting that of the 7 states that are losing a seat, 5 of them are blue: California, Michigan, New York, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, which means people are fleeing blue states. The 2 red ones, Ohio and West Virginia, those are the only 2 Republican states that have lost. And then of the 6 states that are picking up people moving to these states, 4 of them are red states: Montana, Texas, Florida, North Carolina. Only 2 are blue: Colorado and Oregon. Colorado has really only in recent years turned blue, so the Democrats haven't completely destroyed it yet. I'm a little baffled that anyone would move to Oregon right now, unless I guess you're in the rural parts. You wouldn't want to go anywhere near Portland, the home base of Antifa. But what I found most interesting about this is one of the most prominent political handicappers in Washington, David Wasserman, tweeted out that Michigan Dems, when it comes to the congressional redistricting process, are likely to fare worse under the citizens redistricting process versus a Republican redistricting process. Based on where we are right now, his analysis is that the seat that we lose is likely to come out of the western suburbs of Metro Detroit. And so you could see a scenario in which Elisa Slotkin could be running against Haley Stevens, or Haley Stevens could be running against Levin, and Dale Kilde's seat could become more of a swing seat. So right now, I would say political momentum in the environment is favoring Republicans. If that continues over the next 18 months, there is not an inconceivable chance that Republicans could net out 3 congressional seats in Michigan, which would be really extraordinary. I think at a minimum, we're probably going to pick up 1, but we could pick up 3. Kind of throws water on the people, voters, not politicians.
I want to watch the Slotkin versus Stevens smackdown. I'm going to pay top dollar for that ringside seat. Slotkin will make mincemeat of Stevens.
Well, and I think Slotkin is an interesting case study too. When you think about how she defined herself when she first ran in 2018, she made being from Holly, kind of part of her identity in North Oakland County. And I think it was a way to signal that she had kind of rural values and was a centrist. And she ran on her foreign policy experience serving in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration, not as a political appointee. She was, in a career position. So it was not a reflection of her political leanings. It was just who she happened to serve in the administrations that she was a career employee. But that foreign policy experience and connecting herself to Bush was also a way to signal to people that she was a centrist. Well, I can guarantee you the 2022 election is not going to be on foreign policy. And it's not going to really matter what her committee assignments were, what her biography was before she was a member of Congress. And if the Citizens Commission does what it's supposed to do, there is no way that this district is going to stretch from Oakland County to Ingham County. There will be a district probably centered around Ingham County, and there will be a district probably centered around North Oakland County. The Ingham County one's probably more favorable to Democrats, depending on the boundaries. I think it would be difficult for her to leapfrog from Holly to Ingham County to be a candidate. But I think she's probably the one, who was held up in 2020 as the poster child for, the strong Democrat that can't be beat in these swing seats. I think she's going to have lost all that, and I think she's probably the most vulnerable.
What were the rankings that just came out where she's actually less conservative than Rashida Tlaib? I sent that around, and I'm sorry, my brain is blanking.
It was the AC record. No, it was the Conservative Union rankings where she actually has a more liberal voting record than Rashida Tlaib,
which is fascinating.
So running as a moderate, really doesn't hold up.
But it is how she portrays herself. When you go into her district, I mean, I will never forget. I wanted to slap some of them upside the head. You had, supposed independents or conservatives acting like she's so nice because her office returns their phone calls. I mean, she has a really good way of presenting herself as that little Holly sweetheart. But you're right. She's straight up left us all day long. And she's very vulnerable.
Her slip of the tongue at the Dem convention where she said it's party over people always. I don't think was actually a slip of the tongue. I think it was her, saying what she really feels.
Well, and to your point, Meshawn, about her constituent services, I do hear from people in Oakland County that she has a good district operation in that way. Conversely, I hear that Haley Stevens has a disastrous one.
It is.
I do think that how district offices perform can affect the very few people that actually ever interact with a congressional district office. I mean, I worked on the Hill. I was chief of staff to a congressman. Typically, if you're having trouble getting your Social Security check or your passport in time or your veterans benefits, you interact with them. But I don't think you win an election because of district service. But I will say that Haley Stevens has developed a relationship of bad district service, and I do think she is a far more polarizing personality. Stevens puts on a good act of being a centrist, but at the end of the day, as one of my former bosses taught me, who was one of the most conservative members of the House, but Democrats liked him, and it was because of temperament. And he said, why do I have to be vitriolic about my vote? I can be calm and likable and still vote conservative.
I am literally the woman who made Haley Stevens scream, the NRA has got to go, and lose her shit in that meeting. I didn't know you all then, but we literally led 65 people into she had it at a gun range.
I remember this.
We hammered her.
I remember this.
We even had a portable microphone that we stuck into the back of the room so that we could get control and get our questions, and she lost it. They have never let her really truly be out in front of a regular crowd since that day. And that video is still, Lena loved that video. Those were good times.
It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out once the districts are drawn.
Staying on the subject of redistricting, on May 11th, the Citizens Independent, I put that in air quotes, Redistricting Commission will have their first public hearings in Jackson. And so they will be entertaining testimony from local community leaders and citizens about communities of interest in making their decisions. I think it's worth a discussion about how the commission has performed so far. The commission is comprised of 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 independents, and I would say that so far it seems to be pretty biased towards the Democrats, with 1 Republican pretty regularly voting with Democrats. One of the independents, frankly, seems to be the leader of the liberal bloc. And then one of the Republicans keeps missing votes. And, this commission is paid $55,000 a year. And I think as of right now, they're doing about 5 hours a week of meetings.
Wow.
And just to highlight a couple of these decisions, they actually voted not to say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a 5-4 vote. They wasted a half hour debating the Pledge of Allegiance. I mean, this is one of those things that you would think for a quasi-governmental body, this shouldn't be a difficult thing. But I loved what some of the comments made. The commission chair, Brittany Kellum, Democrat, said it is not her American duty to say the pledge. Democratic Commissioner Dustin Witches, that's a familiar word, said he, quote, disagrees vehemently, unquote, with the request for the pledge. He cited his dual citizenship with the Netherlands and explained if he was asked to say the pledge, he would turn off his camera and refuse. I mean, these are the people that are going to decide the lines that we are governed by for the next decade. And one of them says that he can't commit to the country of which he has dual citizenship.
How is he not removed?
It's
right there?
unbelievable. The so-called independent commissioner, liberal Rebecca Zatella, said that reciting the pledge creates a divisive atmosphere.
Well, and taking it a step further on her for a moment, she was acting as chair for the purposes of this discussion. And anybody who's ever served as chair, under Robert's rules, you don't lead a discussion by first announcing your opinion.
Excellent point.
You say, okay, yes, Ted, I will call on you. You have your hand raised. And then I would also like to offer opinions maybe at the end, but you don't lead it. And she kicked it off, started the entire conversation with, this is divisive, rather than going to the person, I believe it was one of the Republican commissioners who made this motion to recite the pledge. Hey, you made this motion. Why don't you talk to us about why this is important to you? Instead, went right off the bat with why it's a bad idea.
Well, and there's a Republican commissioner, Cynthia Upton, who's missed a couple of votes and could have been the deciding or at least drawn to a tie on some of these votes. And I don't know the reasons for her absence, but I think there's about 3 votes that I'm aware of that she could have been a deciding factor but was not present. And again, these people wanted this position. They're in it. It's critically important to every person in the state. And they have an obligation to be there and represent, particularly when, it's supposed to be nonpartisan, but we have partisans in the room making decisions. When our partisans don't show up, their partisans win. And so far, the independents seem to be more aligned with the Democrats than being independent. Another controversial decision they made was appointing a Democratic donor and activist, Bruce Adelson, as their legal counsel. This actually was so objectionable that the Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, Speaker of the House Jason Wentworth, issued a joint statement in opposition to this appointment. Every single member of the Republican congressional delegation, we here at the Michigan Republican Party put a statement out in opposing it. The Freedom Fund and Fair Maps Michigan all issued statements opposing it. He was approved. He is a donor to President Biden and Secretary of State Benson, and he was involved in the very controversial redistricting in Arizona. His role in the 2010 redistricting there actually triggered a change in Arizona, where they now have 1 Republican and 1 Democrat serving in these positions. That is because of Adelson's tenure. There was a motion to reconsider the hiring after the Republicans objected. This was one of the meetings that Cynthia Upton missed. I do think it's worth noting that 1 Democrat and 1 independent joined 2 Republicans in supporting a reconsideration of the hire, but we were 1 vote short of getting that to happen. You guys have any thoughts about what you've seen so far from the Citizens Commission?
So-called independent commission doesn't seem so independent.
I think there's a lot of them who are taking their civic duty very, responsibly. They are doing their best to honor the overall intent of this, which is to take partisan politics out of the drawing of maps. Unfortunately, I feel like they are being drowned out by the louder, more politically active voices in the room.
The process in itself, you guys have all seen maps been drawn. It's not an easy process. And especially with all the new rules. But, I do 100% agree with you. I think that some of the most of the folks in the commission are trying to take their efforts very seriously. But go to the Adelson example for a minute. So he was, I think, unanimously approved, right? And we learned about it pretty late that the hire was going to happen. But we did some very minimal research, engaged the appropriate parties, and put some facts in front of the commission that they did not have. We did a couple of Google searches and found Democrat donations and some real leftist, posts on his social media. We didn't do much to dig up the fact that this guy was a very left-leaning liberal that they were going to hire, who has a history. I think that there was one news story from his work in Arizona that said, his involvement led to this commission becoming a partisan disaster or something along those lines. And so they then revisited this the next week and had a 5-4 vote that was lost upon revisiting this. But who's staffing this commission where they didn't have this information ahead of time? Why did it take?
And if they did have it, why was it ignored?
Yes, I just think that it is clear that it's not just a problem with the commissioners who are inexperienced and maybe trying, but what else is happening behind the scenes that we just don't know about? And that's, I think, the number of questions that we have that we're going to have to raise over the coming months to it's not just what we're seeing, it's what we're not seeing that is even probably more scary to me.
Well, and I think this is actually an important segue on the lack of confidence that Michiganders have in their institutions. And this is one that we are quickly losing confidence, is doing what they can and should do to do this. But that leads me to the next topic, voting reform, which has become unnecessarily controversial. I think it's important when we think about the proposals from the Senate and the House on strengthening our voting laws to make sure that it is harder to cheat and to restore confidence. There is plenty of polling out there. About half of Americans don't have confidence in the integrity of our voting system. It doesn't matter who those Americans are, if they're right, left, or independent. It just matters that half the country doesn't have confidence in our electing system. So doing nothing is not an option. The Democrats, with some big assists from the media, have tried to turn this into a race thing, throwing around very reckless language, Jim Crow, the idea that somehow voter ID in any way suppresses the vote or in any way negatively impacts the Black community is just nonsense. I find it racist that that's the left's position, that this is that somehow the Black community is incapable of functioning with ID.
Did you listen to Tim Scott last night?
I did.
He brought tears to my eyes. It was just incredible. What a perfect person to pick.
And they've used race to divide and demonize to the point where, and listen, it's not new. As long as I've been alive, I've listened to Democrats try to call Republicans racist because it's politically convenient to their agenda. But we've done some polling here at the state party, and this matches up with national polling. And I think it's important because when you hear the rhetoric, you would think that we were on the wrong side of public opinion, and we're not. We're on the overwhelming right side. 72% of Michiganders think we should require ID for voting. 58% of Black Michiganders believe we should have voter ID. And even though the left is pushing this narrative, a plurality of Democrats, 46% compared to 43%, believe we should use ID when voting. This shouldn't be controversial. The media, again, with their big assist, 30 Michigan CEOs signed a letter that was portrayed as a condemnation of Republican reform bills. Mm-hmm. Well, if anybody, including these reporters, had taken a minute to read the letter that these CEOs signed, it was not a condemnation at all. It was a statement of principles. And those principles apply directly to the Senate package that is supposed to be full of, Jim Crow era voter suppression. It is bullshit, excuse my language, and it's infuriating that the left is getting away with it. And it's infuriating that the media is using language. I forget which publication. It was one of the major dailies. I think it was the Free Press. Had a headline, Michigan CEOs condemn GOP voting bill. Zero condemnation. So it'd be nice if the reporters would look at that a little more clear-eyed and be honest with the voters.
This voter suppression lie, because that's exactly what it is. It is an absolute lie. It is never. I would make the argument that it is easier to vote in this country now than it has absolutely ever been. How many ads, Facebook ads, did you get? How many people track you down on the street? Actually, with the bills that we're talking about, with these reforms that we're talking about, the only people for whom it makes it more difficult to vote are those people who are not legally able to do so. Mm-hmm. That's it. And we should feel good about that. And I think that like you said, this for these stories to have been written accusing us of voter suppression, Jim Crow, without any pushback, without asking, well, what specific, was unbelievable. I mean, that is malpractice to print that kind of stuff when we're talking about common sense, widely accepted reforms. I mean, all the polling has determined these are widely accepted common sense reforms. And story after story was this, pushing this voter suppression lie. And it was unbelievable.
And Democrats, I mean, they've been pushing this narrative, as Jason said, for years. And so, some journalists, I don't even know that they're intentionally doing it. I think it's just by habit at this point, because Democrats have been propagating this lie for years, and particularly in Michigan's case, where if you look at the language specifically, this is nothing to do with suppressing vote. In fact, this is all about making it easier to vote and harder to cheat.
Well, and if you look at both parties, right? What is half of our budget go to? Getting out the vote. I mean, our focus for years has been turning people out. Have you ever run into a voter suppression line item on a political budget?
I have done this for 30 years, and I don't ever remember anyone doing something like, I don't remember being in a strategy meeting or discussing tactics. How can we suppress
we
this
need
vote?
to stop them.
Yeah, it's about growing our party and getting out our vote and adding coalitions. That has been our entire focus, and the Democrats' focus too, right?
Yeah,
that is our goal as a party,
That's the
is to
difference.
turn our people out, educate, persuade.
They know we're
get
right
them
on
out.
this. They know we're right
That's
on
right.
this. They know we're right on it, and that's why they have to go to their age-old trick of, they can't compete with us on the content of what we're offering.
Right.
So they're going to
Fear-mongering
label it fearmonger, and it's racist, and it's suppression. And that's where they have
It's
to go
almost
with
like
this.
they throw
because
out
they know
their
we're right.
keywords. Like, whenever anything happens,
Oh,
they
yeah.
throw out their keywords and all the media just jumps on, it's Jim Crow, and then they all run with it. They know what to do.
Yep. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, I do think that they find themselves on the wrong side of public opinion. I think that one thing I have heard from a number of people associated with the businesses is how this legislation was presented to them when they were asked to sign this letter, and what actually was in it did not match. That they were misled by that same nonsense rhetoric, and they had committed based on what was presented to them. And when they actually looked at the legislation, they realized, oh, that's not what's in this. And I think it's, again, to your point, it's malpractice. It is a disservice to the voters that the media is just reflexively,
Especially
going along
in
with
this
one.
cancel culture, woke society where we're living in, that we're going to cancel somebody before we even know the story. We're going to throw out this rumor of voter suppression and Jim Crow and all of these things with zero to back it up, and cancel business X because they have the audacity to say, let me read this bill before you ask me to sign off on it.
And I think the corporation, and these woke dopes who are within these corporations who, make a bunch of noise, I do believe that they've scared a lot of these folks. They've seen the power of cancel culture, and I'm sure we could spend an entire podcast talking
Just on
about
fear.
Yeah, they've seen the power of that. So it's not that I don't understand even, the corporations look at it, but we're at a point where we just need to start being intellectually honest with one another. And when we see a package of bills that is, again, common sense, widely accepted, people cannot be bowing down to the woke culture when.
Well,
that's our job, to keep messaging the right message.
Well, and listen, for people in the media and the establishment that, are carrying water for Democrats on this, going back to when half the voters don't trust our system, doing nothing's not an option. If we have close elections in 2022 and in 2024 and people are unhappy with the outcomes and they think that there was fraud, what we have had to deal with as a country, over the last 5 months since the 2020 election, we'll be dealing with that in every election. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to reassure people that they can trust our electoral system, or we'll live like we're living now for many years to come. And so I think we have an obligation to protect the American experiment, to reassure people that they can trust the system. Well, let's finish on something fun. This week we announced the Mackinac Conference will take place People, I think, have been worried with all the COVID shutdowns. Paul, you've been taking the lead. You want to talk a little bit about what we can expect?
Yeah, we're excited. I think that people or this is going to be one of our most important Mackinac conferences, I think. I mean, number one, people, coming out of their locked basements that Gretchen put everybody in. So we're excited to have everybody come up to the island. I think that, our theme this year is all in Michigan. And, we're going to talk about policies and leadership that really highlight really what we've been through in the last year. Because I tell you what, from a policy perspective, after 8 years of Rick Snyder, I mean, we were trending in the right direction in absolutely every single way. And 2.5 years into the policies of Gretchen Whitmer, we're trending the wrong way in just about every single way. So being able to highlight, number one, some of the small business and entrepreneurial success stories, people who have powered through unthinkable challenges over the last year, and to be able to highlight some of those amazing Michigan businesses, amazing Michigan entrepreneurs and folks who have really done an extraordinary job, and to be able to talk about some of the policies that are going to hopefully lead us out of this. I think we're going to have some incredible discussions. We've already secured some really top-notch
very exciting speakers. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. But
we'll start announcing those May 15th. What are the dates, and how do people, if they're interested in going?
September 24th through the 26th. I think our Grand Hotel reservations open on May 15th, but you can register right now. MRLC2021.com is the website you can go to. You can also go to our Facebook page.
Another thing for people who have never been, I always get asked this, and I think it's something you don't understand until you experience it, is if you literally want to walk off the ferry and walk through town and have a beer with or bump into at the ice cream shop all of the candidates that are potentially going to be on the ballot. So all of the candidates for governor and secretary of state, attorney general, judicious, plus all of the, how many House seats are we going to have open? I would expect all those candidates. So
well, and
it's a great place
they teased a little bit about the high-profile keynotes. We have 2 confirmed candidates that are widely talked about as candidates for president. We've gotten very positive feedback from 2 other big names, governors, senators, formers.
So you're on a tiny island with your future governor and possibly
maybe
your future president.
So it is.
Who could miss that?
Even I started going to this when I was a little kid. I think I went to my first one in 1977. So it's an amazing time, and just being on the island, especially that time of year, it's a little cooler. It's a blast. So hope to see everyone. Well, this was our inaugural grand old podcast. I think it went pretty well. We'll see if we did anything wrong, and maybe we'll edit it. Maybe we won't.
Only said shit a couple times.
I don't know what the disclaimer requirements are, but I'm just going to say this was paid for by the Michigan Republican Party, just in case. And we're going to plan to do this weekly. We will release it every Friday, and love your feedback. Get on the website, migop.org, and you can find our contact information. And if you have any ideas for things that we might talk about, send us a note and let us know. Have a great weekend.
People suck, people suck, people suck. I don't like y'all. People suck, people suck, people suck.